In this 10-year anniversary video, I'm explaining the basics in model railroad planning and how the layout was built over the past 10 years.
Hello and welcome! This month it's been 10 years since I started to build on this layout. So this is it's a bit of an anniversary video here. And I'm gonna talk a bit about the planning steps I did and also how it was built. Everything from painting the walls to building the framework and everything like that. Because one of the more common questions I get from people who's especially new to the hobby is, where do I start? And some people, they go to their local dealer and buy a starter set. And some people take their camera or phone nowadays and go out on the areas where they intend to make models of and take photos. And some people, they just download a track planning software like AnyRail or something like that and start fiddling with all of those track pieces. And it doesn't really matter if you take an afternoon to do your planning or, like I did, 18 months. It's always good to have a feeling of what this planning should include, so you can put focus on what's important for you. And a layout which is planned only a few hours ahead of building it, or 18 months, it can be equally good layouts, but it's always good to have an idea of what you can include and why. I typically use a 5-step method for planning new model railroads. And that it doesn't matter if it's a small layout or really large layout, or scale, N scale, or HO scale, or manufacturer. It doesn't matter. I always use these 5 steps, and depending on the complexity of the layout and who's the customer, I include different amount of work into each of these steps. And I will go through all of those steps in detail later, but I will just walk you through the 5 steps here. And the first one is, you have to think about, your layout. Will it be a prototypic layout? Meaning you are going to make a scale model of something that's out there in real life. If you do so, it's kind of easy, because then you can go outside or read in a book or whatever to find out what things look like, and it's easy for you to pick elements from that and combine your own layout. The other method is basically to freelance. Well, then you make a nice track work which you think is fun and suits your needs. And then you buy houses from Faller or Vollmer or Walters to populate this layout, and it's a freelance type of design. The second is making a line diagram. This line diagram is a fundamental diagram which you always can go back to later during the build and the planning. And this is made to ensure that you end up with a functional model railroad. So 10 years later, I should have been doing this instead. Yeah. And then you have to think about what the layout style and layout shape you want, or actually what can what fits the space you have, the room or several rooms where you want to put your layout. And we'll go through the bits and pieces in that. And then the 4th step is to fit this dream layout of yours into the available space. And there is a very good method how to do this. This is typically the major problem for most people. You have ambitious ideas of what you want to do, but you have very limited space. And the 5th part is the track work design. And then you can download AnyRail or whatever software, if you want to draw it on paper, whatever. But then it's just to get the bits and pieces together. And after that, you can start the actual build. All right, so let's move back to that first step, meaning the prototype selection. And if you like the most common way to do it, like I did, I selected my childhood town. Yeah, so then you have a lot for free. You can select some objects like a station or buildings or environments from that prototype and make sure to fit them onto the model railroad later. So you need to kind of reserve a space and put priority to be able to fit them later. The second thing you probably want to do is to select era. And you know, even though my layout is kind of large, I realized in the later steps that I cannot run all that long trains anyway. So I went for a 1950s era, meaning short trains, shorter cars, and this will fit the space I have available for my layout in a better way than, you know, selecting a modern era layout. And you see here behind me, I'm cheating a bit. This is a 2022 speed train, but hey, you don't have to be all that hardcore, I think. All right, so now we're ready to have a look at the fundamental components which a model railroad typically consists from. And yeah, I typically count them to 5, but there are of course more, but these 5 are kind of the more essential. And if you're choosing a prototypic approach, you will end up looking probably more to what your prototype consists from. And also, this is kind of interesting because this has to do a lot with your preferences. What do you like? How do you like to operate your model railroad? What do you think is fun? And if you're new to the hobby and you haven't had a model railroad before, this question is of course very hard to answer. And my advice then is to find a friend. Get over to him or her and try that layout out and see what you like. What feels meaningful for you and what kind of traffic do you like? Yeah, so that's an advice. Or if you have no, if you don't have any friends, no. But if you don't have that opportunity to go somewhere and try a layout out, then my advice is to do a bit of everything. And then once you have progressed into your construction of the layout, you will find out what you like most. And this differs actually a whole lot from one person to another. So, but these 5 steps, let's get back to them. The first one is the freight traffic. Yeah, so transporting cargo from one destination to another. And for those you need industries or an harbor or, you know, a station which receives and sends postal parcels or something like that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, at least here in Europe, passenger traffic. And for that you need stations. And to make a passenger scenario interesting, you need both a kind of main station and some smaller stations, at least another station, so you can transport passengers between these stations. And even better, a branch line station, which is a kind of terminal station. So that goes down to the main station and they change train there to go to some regional station that's also fitted on your layout. So that's the second thing. Then the third component of a model railroad is the main lines. And also its branch line. Let's start with the main lines. The main lines, that's the place where your trains will show off. So the expensive trains you bought for half of your monthly salary will appear on the main line. And then I think it's important to plan for parade routes. The Germans talk about Paradstrecken. And that's a place where your train shows off before it disappears into a tunnel or whatever. On my layout here, I have 2 parade routes. One is behind me here, and the other one you don't see, it's behind the camera. That both of these are approaching the main station. So that's how I set things up here. The branch line is this one up here. This one connects to the main station. So both freight, also cargo, and passengers are changing at the main station to continue either south or north. So that's it. One thing you might want to have as well is a engine depot or a locomotive station. For me, I've had this on the previous 5 layouts, and I know I don't use it all that much. It's actually mostly just a piece to show, and it looks pretty, but unfortunately it's not used all that much. So for me that had kind of lower priority. It's also very space consuming. So I had it with me. I added it into my wish list, but it had a low priority. So if there were no space, I will take it off. The last part is probably the most important one, and that is train storage. Americans call it the staging yards, and Germans Schattenbahnhof. What it's about is storage track, hidden or visible tracks in a yard where you can store trains. And the idea with this is to have a circulation of different trains on your layout. So one train goes away and another comes back. But it's also valid for me, like running both the 50s kind of steamers and really fast modern bullet trains, to store away another era of trains when you're running steamers, for instance. It's maybe not so elegant to have speed trains passing a steamer train. So that's another possible use for these train storage tracks. All right, so now here you see what I've selected from this first step, the prototype selection, and the different components which I wanted to include in this layout. So the next step is to draw the line diagram. And my childhood town is Tullinge, and it's located in between Stockholm, which is the capital of Sweden, which is very interesting from a passenger point of view, especially because all the trains will go into Stockholm. And in the other end I have Södertälje. And Södertälje is, they have one of the world's largest truck manufacturer there, Scania. So they are using steel and a range of different materials for their truck manufacturing. So none of these terminals are really, for me, interesting to build. They're huge, do not fit in here, and also I don't have any particular interest in them. So they will be shadow stations, staging yards. So I will have one staging yard in each terminal. Well, running a main line, long passenger trains along this main line between Södertälje and Stockholm is great. I do it especially when I come home from work and I'm kind of tired and I just want to have a look at the trains moving on the layout. I do this. I run main line. But if you want to do something more than just watching the trains passing on the main line, you should add a branch line. So that's what I did. I added this station up here, which is called Himmelsboda. And by doing that, I add both industries and passenger traffic, which then, as said, connects to the main station, Tullinge. And then the most logic placement for the switching yard, where all the freight cars are handled, is by the main station where this branch line is entering into the main station area. So I will add that. And then I have, of course, the passenger station, so I add that. And then I have, I wanted to have 2 parade routes where the train could show off. And one to the south, so I marked that, and one to the north of the main station, like that. And then I wanted this engine depot or locomotive yard. And I wanted to connect that to the main as well, because it's most natural, especially if you run steamers. One steamer comes in, it's the set of cars is disconnected, and that steamer goes into maintenance, and another steamer comes down from the locomotive station. So you you want to have the locomotive, the access to the locomotive station by the main station. And then my third step in planning this model railroad was to select what type of line style I want. And there are basically two ways to go about this. This, what you see here, is a folded line design, meaning that the line here passes mostly often on different height through the same landscape several times. That is what we call a folded line design. The other method is to use a linear line design. Then the line is on a prototypic, in a prototypic manner, just passing through the same piece of scenery once. So I would say this selection I did was for a kind of a stationary operator, because I sit down in the middle and watch the train move across the layout. Whilst the linear design is more suitable if you intend to have what Americans most often do. They have walk-along operation. So they walk along the train as it moves across the layout. And then it's not so interesting to to walk back and forth through the same scenery several times. It's, well, no, it makes no sense. So then you have a linear design instead. And the line itself is shaped as a dog bone. You can see a dog bone here, what it looks like. Other alternatives to this is point to point, or point to loop, or loop to loop. It all depends on your prototype and how you want, really how you enjoy operating a model railroad. So this is it's a kind of a personal thing. Then it comes to the shape, and then you can do a lot of different things with the layout. This is a very simple solution I made with just one piece of scenery, and the tracks are on different heights and on widths, so that's how it is. But you can also do a bi-level design, which is very elegant. And then you have most often also a linear type line. But what you do, you have one piece of scenery, and then it goes through a helix and it passes through the second scenery below. That way you get twice the amount of layout in the same space. Then I was ready for the fourth step, which is, fitting this dream layout into the available space. So this is always the trickiest part, because the dreams are unlimited while the available space is most often very limited. So, but there is a trick to do this, and that is to make a drawing, a scale drawing of the room you have available, like this, and then you divide this into squares. And the size of the square is the curve radius you have selected plus 2 cc dimensions. So you have one inner curve, which is the tightest curve you can accept, and then you might want to have a parallel track to that. So that you have the first cc dimension, and then on the outside you need another cc dimension for clearance. And that is, because if you have long passenger coaches or long freight cars, you don't want them to hit scenery or structural elements around the sub-road bed. So that is basically the size of your square. So I had made some calculations here. Say if you're going for 560 millimeter curve radius, which is a kind of elegant curve radius, it equals to 22 inches. And then you have 2 inches of CC, which is 50 millimeters, which is kind of common. Märklin has a bit more CC between their tracks, so then you have to go for a bit more there. And then you need another CC dimension for clearance, and that will end up at 660 millimeter for each square. So like that, and that's 24 inches. Now, when you do this, you trade off the curve radiuses, So you will kind of quickly realize that you cannot fit your dream layout with your dream curve radiuses into your available space, unless you have a very, very large room for it. So what you need to do then is to have sharper curves, and that in turn leads to shorter trains. So, but this is a very good thing to go about things. Just the fact that you divide your available spaces into these squares will tell you a lot of, if you can fit your model railroad into that space, or if you should consider another room maybe for your layout, or if you maybe should change scale, because in some cases it's not even possible to fit two of these squares with the tightest curve radius available from your manufacturer into your available space. And then you should consider a smaller scale, like N scale or even set. Something like that. So don't be afraid to do that. It's more important to follow the path along your dream than to try to cram in the wrong scale into a into a tight space. Once you have settled for your curve radiuses and roughly how you will have your layout laid out, it's time to decide for train length. Maximum train length for the main line. That will set the length of platforms and sidings you might have. Also, if you select staging areas, shadow station, you need to have that length at least for your staging tracks. So this is also often a difference between what's possible in reality and what your dream length is of your of your trains. And then once you've done that, you do the same for the branch line. If you have selected a branch line like I have here, then everything is smaller on the branch line typically. So then train lengths will be shorter there as well. So you can add that length into station tracks and platforms and whatever you're planning to have on that branch line. And then the third thing you should do in this is also to establish the longest engine or locomotive you will run on the layout, because that greatly affects what turntable you choose for your locomotive station or engine depot, and the lengths of tracks and everything. So with these three things defined, you're really ready to move to the fifth step, and that is to download AnyRail or some other track planning software and try to get all the track pieces in place. But at this point, with all this thought through, it's very easy to make this. If you start with the track planning and you haven't thought about all of these other things, then it can be an endless process, especially if it's a big layout. So try to make things in the right order here. 5 steps. Okay, now we're ready to get started on the construction of the layout and how I went about that.
A good thing to do is to get started on the stuff which is fitted to the ceiling. In my case, that was the illumination. Back in 2012, when I built this model railroad, there were no LED lamps available for this purpose, so I had to fit halogen lamps like this instead. This had major drawbacks. One is I fitted it too close to the backdrop, so I got the shadowing effect over the entire backdrop, which was very bad. Another thing is that each of these halogen lamps emits over 100 watts of heat, which made it impossible to have the illumination on during summer days in my garage. So later on I had to fit instead what I should have had from the beginning, meaning a floodlight, which is tubes of LED here, fitted like this behind a blind towards the backdrop and the landscape, and then some spotlights, which creates a bit of harder lights and give a contrast and the shadowing effects in the landscape surface. One can say that the floodlights from the tubes gives a good general ambient light, like on a cloudy day outside. By adding the spotlights, you turn it into a sunny day and everything looks much brighter and more contrasty. I early decided to just paint a blue sky with some clouds on myself, but I felt I was missing something, so I started to paint also landscape. This was, well, not so easy, but the very tricky part was to get the perspective right in the ground behind. So it all ended up when I replaced this painted backdrop with a bought backdrop from this one's from Faller. So nowadays I have this backdrop all around the layout. With that done, I could start with the framework construction. Now, early in the process I decided to go for a lightweight framework which I could elevate up into the ceiling and preferably have my car underneath. These worm gear motors came from a vending machine, and they could pull the layout up and down, so no problem, but the problem was the holding force, and also when elevating it didn't elevate perfectly straight, so cars start to roll in the yards and so I decided to get rid of this system and instead put traditional table legs underneath. I then continued with the framework. It's basically a L-girdle type framework built from birch plywood, only 4mm thick. With the framework I also constructed this operator console. It had this industry trackball, which was an excellent solution, I thought, but maybe not. Not so long after, a few years, they invented these media keyboards with a touchpad, which was much better to have, controlling turnouts and trains. And when you're moving around in the room, these smartphones were the ultimate solution to control trains and turnouts. The command station do not all that often need your attention, so I put that into the drawer instead. With the framework and the console in place, I started to construct the sub roadbed, and in my case I'm using 4mm birch plywood, and the reason for that rather than spruce is that birch do not skew or warp, not even over a long time. The drawback is the cost, it's twice as expensive. On top of that I have a felt to reduce the noise coming from the track. Then I invited two friends over to put the first tracks down, and we spent the afternoon and I think we laid about 150 tracks there, plus had a few beers and a few laughs. And this was the status just before summer, when I ended the work on the layout for the season. Back in those days I just did model railroading during the winter time. And happy enough for this, I took a first video. I think this was an iPhone 3S. And here we can see the train coming down towards the shadow station. Here is a shot of the first tracks in the harbor, and on this other side here I've just got started on the second layer. After summer I started on the Helix, which is the spiral shaped sub-roadbed which will carry the train from 212mm up to 436mm height by the main station. With those pieces in place I added the layout edges. I think that's a great thing to do because it enhances the layout, the appearance of the layout a lot. I painted the plywood with mahogany color, added high gloss varnish and some cup holders. And I can say after 1 year of cutting plywood I was kind of tired of that. The last piece of the sub-roadbed needed for the main line was the parade routes. The parade routes binds the U together, meaning the main station up here, from where you see this view, to the two sides of the layout. The flex tracks were glued directly onto the plywood, which was also a bad decision. but I didn't know better at that time. I should have had some cork or something else in between here, but it's very hard to change now afterwards. With that done, I started to make blocks and connected all of the feedback cables through this 50-pole flat cable with clamp-on connectors. At this time I also started to make these panels with toggle switches, which were to control the turnouts at all the different sidings. The intention was to put them in small drawers like this, so you can slide them in when you didn't use them. And then in December 2013 I've laid down an excess of 1000 track pieces and constructed all of the necessary roadbed. And then I put the first train on the layout, which were allowed to pass over from one side to another. For the 5-year anniversary I made the same recording in the same position, but as it looked then 2018. After some tweaking of the track work, I started in February 2014 on the branch line station, which I call Himmelsboda. The access to this area is, well, it's not bad, but it's limited, so I decided to build the branch line station in my workroom instead. And then, when completed, I moved it over to the layout. And with the module in place, I could integrate it with paper, aluminum mesh and glue. It was in this area I started to use rock molds and try out how to assemble and paint them, and then I decided to go for them throughout the entire layout. And this is what it looks like. And this is what Himmelsboda looks like today. In November the same year I started on construction of the locomotive yard or engine facility with its roundhouse and turntable. The access to this area on the layout is somewhat limited, so I decided to do the same thing, namely building it in my hobby room and then move it over to the layout when completed. So this is the construction work. I expanded my roundhouse from 3 to 6 ports and then added additional details. And this is my friend helping me. We couldn't even get it out through the door. We had to take it out through the window before we can finally fit it onto the layout. And this is what it looks like today when fully integrated. Now, to boost the usage of this, the track work in the locomotive yard, I have initiated a range of different freight traffic. So this diesel engine pushes up diesel to the diesel depot or the diesel fueling station. There are also transports of coal up to this station, and empty coal cars going back. I've also transport for ash and some spare parts for the steamers, which the guys in the shed can use, and that has really boosted the traffic up there. So I don't constantly need to clean the tracks and do maintenance work there to get things to run properly. Now, the last part to be completed on my layout was the main station area. I started making platforms at least back in November 2017 and released a video how to make platforms from styrofoam. So far so good. This is the status as per when the platform was installed with a roof and this entrance hole there. But in real life it looked a long time like this, so nothing behind the station at all. Then back in August 2018, Noch turned to me and said, "Hey, can you make a 24 episode calendar for our YouTube channel?" So, well, then the entire area was transformed into a snowy winter landscape with a German Christmas market too. So, not exactly according to my plans, but really fun to explore the materials available to make snow. Then back in 2020 I was tasked to build a diorama of Abisko tourist station, which is a part of Lapland, with these sleeping coaches and iron ore trains. So another detour for my main station area. After that, I was tasked to make a city scene and make cobblestone roads using this roller tool. Well, again, a detour for my main station area. But hey, I kind of like this city scene I created. So I continued to build on that and integrated a range of different materials and ideas into that. And again, this is not exactly what I planned for initially for my layout, but on the other hand, I think it's a great amendment which enriches the appearance of the layout, so why not really? And in the remaining last uncovered corner of the layout, just above the helix, I constructed this city park. The construction of the park can be viewed in a video called Ultimate Guide to Static Grass. So this was the last corner, and this is a video sequence of the layout as per today.
All right, so 1,000 track pieces and 10 years later, here I am with my layout. And yeah, I should say that I would never have started with this Märklin M-Rail unless there had been the cost factor. At the time I made this selection for track system, the difference in price was 4,000 euros between buying second-hand M-Track and new tracks. But you know, for me it was no alternative. Either I built the layout or I did not. So for me it was really simple. But if I were to make that decision today, I would definitely not build this layout with M-Rail. So I just wanted to say that because I get a lot of questions. If you have some other questions, please post them in the comment field below this video and I'll try to respond to that as soon as possible. Did you know that this channel is made possible? I'm working full-time with this Märklin of Sweden channel since 3 years, and it's made possible because of the patrons supporting the channel. You know, think of this as a magazine subscription. Get over to Patreon, set up a support account there from, you know, like $1-2 per month, or make a one-off donation using the PayPal dialog found in the video description below. And if you not yet have subscribed, please subscribe and you'll get the notification once next video is published, and that will happen about in 3 weeks. approximately, and we will have a look at yard detailing at that time. So take care and stay safe.